Good morning, boys and girls. I am back and I am going to continue reading this book, Behind the Bedroom Wall by Laura E. Williams. And yesterday I read chapter 2 and I am going to continue chapter 3 today. So let's see. Let's find out what happened in chapter 3, okay? All right, chapter 3. When Karina got home after school, she didn't call out to her mother, whom she heard talking to Aunt Hendrikia in the other room. First, she wanted to find her kitten. Quietly, she took off her boots and hung up her coat in a small front hall. Her father wasn't home yet. She could tell because his big boots weren't in their usual place under the small square mirror hanging on the wall. Karina slipped past the front room where her mother and aunt sat talking and stepped silently up the narrow stairs to her bedroom. In her room, she deposited her book bag neatly on the floor next to her screen. She picked up the ribbon off the floor. How did that get there? She wondered. She bent down and looked under her bed for her kitten. She also looked behind her chair and under her small desk. Still stepping softly, Karina moved next door into her parents' room. Again, she looked under the bed and in various places, or in various other possible hideaways she thought a kitten might fit into. Here, kitty, kitty, she called softly. Here, kitty, kitty. Nothing. No scratching, no answering meow. With a sigh, Karina resigned herself to the fact that her kitten must be downstairs in the kitchen or in the front room with her mother. She returned to her room and lay down on her soft feather bed and closed her eyes for just a minute. The subdued murmuring floating up from downstairs soothed her. Karina! Karina's eyes flew open. The afternoon glow had vanished from her room, leaving an eerie shroud of darkness in its place. Karina, her mother said again, are you ill? She walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's forehead. Why didn't you come in and see Auntie? Now she's left. Karina sat up. Sorry, mother, I was going to come down, but I must have fallen asleep. Is Aunt Hendrikia angry? I think her feelings were hurt more than anything. Is that why she left so early? I thought she was staying for dinner. She did, Karina. She's eaten and gone. Frau Rem said, tucking a loose strand of Karina's reddish gold hair behind her ear. Karina gasped. What time is it? Nearly 5. Why didn't you wake me up to eat? Karina asked. I let you sleep because I thought you might be ill. I was just tired. Today was a long day. Karina said. Her stomach rumbled. Is there any food left? She asked hopefully. Frau Rem smiled. There's a plate fixed for you downstairs. Go now while it's still hot. Karina hugged her mother and trotted downstairs to the kitchen. The bright, warm kitchen smelled of the sweet scent of sugar buns and cake. Two extra special treats reserved for days when they had guests, especially now that the price of sugar and shortening was so high and nearly impossible to get thanks to the war. But of course, it was worth it. She reminded herself hastily, as her young mother leaders always said, no sacrifice for the fatherland was too great. Sitting down, she glanced around the small room for a tiny black and white kitten, but she didn't see her. Karina felt a twinge and disappointment that her kitten hadn't come scrambling for her the minute she'd walked in the door, and now it even seemed to be hiding on purpose. Karina quickly finished eating and walked into the front room, and only the other room they had downstairs. It was empty. Not even her father filled his stuffed chair as he did every night after supper blowing smoke rings at imaginary targets. Checking once more behind the long sofa, Karina finally gave up her search for her kitten and went back downstairs. Mother, Karina called, walking into her parents' bedroom. The room was empty. Puzzled, she turned around and walked into her own room. Her mother stood in the middle of the floor, gently stroking the head of the kitten. Where did you find her? Karina exclaimed, taking the kitten from her mother's hands. She was under your bed. But I checked under the bed. Maybe she slipped in while you were eating, her mother suggested. Maybe she rubbed the silken head. Where's Papa? she asked, changing the subject. He's at school meeting. Karina raised her eyebrows. This late? Fraulein reached over and patted the kitchen's tiny head. He came home and left again. You slept through it. When will he be home? Soon. 7 at the latest. What time is it now? Frau Rem checked her watch. 20 until 6. Oh no, Corinna exclaimed, heading toward the door. What's wrong? Corinna dashed down the stairs, her kitten still clutched in her arms. The Fourier speaking on the radio. So here she is. I don't know if you can see it. See it? She is sitting down listening to Hitler speaking on the radio. As her mother followed her down, Corinna turned on the old radio to the official station. Already Adolf Hitler's voice was traveling over the radio waves with a special message for his people. The Young Mother leaders had urged all the members to listen to their Fourier tonight. Karina always looked forward to hearing his radio broadcasts. She only wished she could see him speak in person. For the rest of the half hour, Karina sat in front of the radio, listening to the Fourier's voice. At first, the speech was quiet yet forceful. But soon the voice took on a moving ring. By the end of the speech, Adolf Hitler spoke to the top of his voice over the cheers of his followers. What he said was always the same: destroy the enemy, the Jews and the radical intellectuals, and out of the misery they were now in. A stronger, more unified Germany would ascend. A Germany without poverty, without unemployment. The Third Reich that would last for 1,000 years. At the end of the speech, Karina dropped her kitten on the sofa and stood up as it scurried out the room. She lifted her right arm in a smart salute. Hail Hitler! She looked expectantly at her mother. Frau Rem, sitting on the sofa and darning one of her husband's socks, looked up at her daughter. Hail Hitler, she murmured. Then she went back to her sewing. Karina smiled and sat down next to her mother. Isn't the Fourier wonderful? Frau Rem agreed. Mother, weren't you paying attention to him? His speech was wonderful. Frau Rem shrugged slightly, but Karina caught the subtle movement and she frowned. Frau Rem said, his speeches are all beginning to sound the same. He repeats himself only because he wants us to remember the important things. What important things? Who our enemies are, of course, and what we can look forward to when Germany wins the war and becomes the power it once was. Karina said, repeating the very word her young mother leader had said the day before. Our Fourier is going to do all this? Of course. Florine put down her sewing. At whose expense? At what cost? Karina stood up. Mother, I cannot believe you're talking like this. Frau Rim gently reached up and took her daughter's hand. Sit down, Karina. I love the fatherland as much as you, if not more because I've been alive longer. But you mustn't follow blindly behind great promises. Karina allowed her mother to pull her down beside her. Mother, how can you question the Fourier? Someone might report you. Is that the only reason it's wrong to question what one man is saying? Fear? It's not fear, Mother, Karina said impatiently. It's love and respect. I have nothing to fear from anyone because I'm a loyal German. Just like you, Mother. And you should never question the Fourier because he's only doing what's best for us. Karina's mother didn't say anything. She picked up her darning and once again began to sew. Karina sat silently watching her mother for a few moments. Finally, she said, Rita is going to tell our leaders about her cousin Elma or Elsa Dimmer. Her own cousin? Frau Grimm said with a sigh, shaking her head. Elsa said she felt sorry for our enemies. Who? The English? The French? Karina picked impatiently at the loose thread on the couch. No, the Jews. Suddenly they heard a muffled crash upstairs. What was that? Karina whispered, afraid to move. She noticed her mother's face looked pale, as though she had to put on too much powder. Stay here, her mother whispered firmly. She stood up and walked out of her room. Karina heard her mother make her way stealthily up the stairs. Then only silence. Karina didn't move. She strained her ears to hear anything at all. Had someone managed to break in upstairs? Had someone crept in the front door while they had been listening to the radio? Karina! Karina jumped up when her mother called. She raced upstairs. Her mother stood in a larger bedroom, looking at a fallen brass figurine, which normally sat on her father's desk. She cuddled Karina's kid. Frau Rim smiled. This little rascal is into mischief already. I don't think she'll be playing with this statue anymore. Corinna bent down and picked up the heavy brass figure and placed it back on the desk. Taking the kitten from her mother, she said, She must be pretty strong to have knocked that thing onto the floor. Frau Rim nodded in agreement. Just then they heard the back door open. Hello, Herr Rim called, stomping the snow off his boots. I'm home. Karina and her mother hurried downstairs to the kitchen. Frau Rem reached up to give her tall husband a kiss on his smooth cheek. Couldn't you have come in the front door where we have a mat for all this snow? The back door was more convenient, he said shortly. He glanced down at his wife, and she said nothing more important or nothing more about it. Hi, Papa, Karina said, thinking the back door was rather inconvenient. It led out to a narrow back alley which ran between the tightly packed houses at the edge of the city until it finally emptied out onto a seldomly used road. The road was bordered by occasional houses on one side and a thick forest on the other, and it led immediately out of the city. Why did the school have such a late meeting? She asked. How about a kiss first? Her father teased, bending over. The meeting was nothing, just some things we had to go over, he said casually. Corinna took her father's coat. Was it about Fraulein Meiser? No, he snapped his scarf over the high back of a kitchen chair and strode into the front room. Corinna glanced at her mother, who avoided her eyes but took the coat from her arms. She left to hang it up. Corinna followed her father into the front room. He sat in his chair with his feet up on a stool, his head back, eyes closed, and a smoking pipe clamped between his teeth. He should have looked restful, but he didn't. He opened his eyes slightly to look at his daughter as Karina sat down on the opposite couch. He removed the pipe from his mouth. Sometimes it's not good to ask too many questions. You could ask the wrong thing or the wrong thing to the wrong person. But I just want to know what happened to Fraulein Meiser. She was my favorite teacher. She was a good friend, her father replied. I'll tell you what little I know, Karina, but you mustn't talk about her to anyone else. Promise? Karina nodded. Last night, the Gestapo went to her house to arrest her father. She refused to let him go without her. She went with him. Karina gasped. You mean she didn't even have to go? She wanted to? Her father is old. He may be dying. I expect she wants to be with him in case he needs her. Except I'm afraid she'll find that she'll be separated from her father after all. Why? I doubt they keep the man and woman together in those work camps, Huram said. Karina shook her head sadly. Then she went for nothing. It wasn't exactly for nothing, Karina. Then for what? Huram shrugged. For love, I don't know. Karina, maybe there's something even more important than that. Karina silently agreed that love was important. It was love for the fatherland that made her turn in her notes on Fraulein Meiser last week. And she loved her parents, and she knew her parents loved her. What could be more important than love? She couldn't imagine. Why was Fraulein Meiser's father arrested? She finally asked. I don't know. I think it's best not to find out, her father said somberly. Then his face brightened slightly as he smiled at his daughter. Don't you have any schoolwork to do? Karina stood up. Yes. She walked over and gave her father a hug. I'm glad you're home, Papa. I am too, Karina. He gave her a fierce hug. Now go do your homework. Karina kissed her mother in the kitchen, then went upstairs. Her kitten was sleeping in the middle of her bed. She stroked the silky head once, then picked up her book bag, which sat neatly by the side of her bed. For a moment, she just stood there. Hadn't she left her bag next to the skrank? She always left her bag in the same place, next to the wardrobe, not next to the bed. She shrugged. Her mother must have moved it for some reason. If she thought of it, she'd ask her about it later. She took out her books and sat down quietly at her desk, deciding which subject to tackle first. Then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic noise that sounded like something trapped behind her wall. Her heart started to race. It was the mice in her walls. They weren't gone after all. She turned to her bed and saw her kitten stretching and washing its paws. Karina's heart pounded so hard it felt like it was more in the middle of her throat than in her chest somewhere. If only she could find the mouse hole. Her kitten would surely scare the mice away for good. She decided the noise seemed to be coming from the middle of her wall. Holding her breath, she pushed away from her desk and tiptoed to her wardrobe. She crouched down. The back panel of Scrank almost came down to the floor against the wall. Maybe she'd find a concealed mouse hole back there, she thought. Carefully, she pressed her shoulder against the heavy wooden piece of furniture. It wouldn't budge. She pushed again. Nothing. It couldn't be that heavy, she thought with despair. She knew if she could just move her wardrobe, she would find the source of her mouse noises. Karina straightened up and faced the front of the skrank. She placed one trembling hand on either side of it and pulled. Finally, it seemed to be moving. She tugged a little harder, and the wardrobe moved silently away from the wall a bit more, but only on the right side. The mouse noises stopped. She grabbed her kitten. She grabbed her kitten and clutched and squirming animal in her arms. With a thudding heart, she peered around the right backside of the piece of furniture. But there wasn't a little mouse hole leading into the wall. Practically the entire wall behind her wardrobe was missing. Karina thought her heart would explode in her throat. She dropped her kitten. Frantically, she slammed her shoulder against the wardrobe to close up the gaping black void. There was no mouse hole. There was something much bigger hiding back there. She had smelled the rank smell of unwashed bodies, and she had seen the pale glow of skin, and the gleam of eyes. Ooh, what or who do you think she found behind her wall? Oh my goodness. I'm going to show you what she found. This is her peeking. I don't know if you can see it, but and then she saw four eyes looking at her. That's the end of chapter 4. I wonder what Karina would do now. What do you think she would do? Let's find out tomorrow when I read chapter 4.